Good afternoon to everyone, to all our friends, colleagues, and partners in Asia. And good morning to our friends and colleagues in Europe. I hope everybody is doing well today. And I'm happy that you're able to join us in this webinar, the first of our 4 series of webinar sessions. Today, I'll be talking about sterilization, sanitation, and disinfection in the medical industry. We all know that there's actually 2 key requirements in the hospitals, or we call the CSSD. And these are number 1, washing and disinfection, because we all know that you cannot sterilize what you cannot clean. We see this mostly, or in some hospitals, solely in contaminated materials areas. And second, we will be talking about sterilization. And we all know about sterilization, which is to reduce the microbial or bacterial spores in all kind of goods. And this, in the hospitals, you will be able to see this in the sterile goods rooms. But before I start, myself and the rest of our colleagues in Xylem, we are wishing everyone and your families all the best. And we are all hoping that you remain in good health amidst the current COVID-19 global pandemic. And I would like to share with you this quote that life nowadays is not merely being alive, but being well. Before I go to our main topic for today, I'd like to just briefly introduce you to Xylem. We are one of the world's leading water technology companies represented globally. Back in 2017, we were able to produce revenue of almost $5 billion. And back then, we are about 16,500 employees globally and increasing. And we are represented by 150 countries in 7 continents. So this is a presentation where you'll be able to see a segmented industry we're covering and the different business segments from left going to the right. You see there's transport. We're covering from treatment, dewatering, applied water solutions, and then the unit where I belong, and that's in the measurement and control solutions. Myself, which is representing Ebro, is under the analytics business unit. And now allow me to introduce you myself. I am Allan Javier. I'm the product manager for Ebro in Asia Pacific, but concentrating now more on Southeast Asia. And you can see here that under the analytics group, you can see that there is the available technologies and advanced analytic solutions, not only for water, but for different important applications. And Ebro is playing a good part in providing solutions for the food industry, the pharmaceutical and healthcare, And of course, right now, we're going to talk about medical and the hospital. Just for the appreciation of everyone, here's our business breakdown for Xylem Analytics. And you see our global business is segmented into four verticals. Main verticals, the process, which is comprising of 30%, laboratory, where Ebro is under 25%, ocean at 10%, and the surface at 35%. Okay, now we go to the main topic of today's webinar session, and this is the hospital and the medical um, industry. I spent a lot of time trying to organize this very slide for you to appreciate the CSSD workflow. CSSD, by the way, stands for Central Sterile Services Department. In some other places in countries, they are called the Sterile Products Department. But globally, they are well known, commonly called CSSD. So we start from the very start here, the left side of the slide, from the bulk supplies of the hospital, which is a general store, then the wards and units, which is the operating theaters, the patient rooms, the wards and units. What we collect here is from the general store, the clean receipt, then from the wards or from the operations, the dirty receipt. We collect them and we disassemble them, all right? So from the general stores, where we supply the needs of the hospitals with like cotton, gauze, and the other instruments such as gloves, rubber wares, surgical instruments, mentioning that. And this is where actually the washer and disinfector is. And this is where we can provide solutions, because washer and disinfectors in the CSSD is a very critical process that must be measured and that must be verified and qualified. So when all of this is done, then they go to the assembly area because they have to pack all instruments under similar categories, the gloves and the other PPEs, the rubber wares and other accessories. Then after assembly, they go to a very careful inspection. And in the inspection, they check for like damages in the packaging, um, like leaks in the tubes, some very obvious dirts, and other things. Then after it has passed the inspection area, it goes to the pre-sterile or pre-sterile storage. It stays there until they need a demand or they need to supply a demand for an operation in the medical or hospital operations. But before doing that, they go into the process of sterilization. And then this will be elaborated on the succeeding slides. And after a sterilization process, they go to sterile storage and to distribution. So typically, this is how the CSSD workflow looks like. Not actually looks like, but it's actually an SOP. So since we mentioned about two key applications or programs, which is cleaning and disinfection and sterilization, we'll try to elaborate more on these two subjects. Um, this is where we can provide the Ebro solutions. Number one, in the cleaning and disinfection. Um, what do we try to process here are the reusable medical tools or equipment, the stainless steel surgical and operation instrumentations, accessories that are important to um, operations like catheters, intravenous pumps, and crush carts. And the main target here is actually the endoscopes, the bacteriological surveillance, because it goes inside the human body and other contaminations. I did not elaborate more on the main target, but when you are talking about cleaning and disinfection and in also sterilization, we are categorizing three different kinds of materials in the hospitals: the non-critical, the less critical or medium critical, and the critical. And these three categories are processed according to how they are supposed to be disinfected and sterilized. Now, in sterilization, this is actually referring to critical items such as any instruments which are introduced into a human bloodstream or the human body. And the main target um, is obviously all living and active organisms and microorganisms. Why do we do all this? Um, Ivan from Ebro, he's actually like one of the disciples of the CSSD operations, mentioning about the organizations that are very active in the hospital operations. But it is not the same with all countries or all the rest of the countries in the world. But we are regulated. This is for sure. And the standards could be the law of medical products, the Medical Products Operator Ordinance Social Law, and the hygiene requirements for conditioning medical products. The standards and the norms circles around these three. Um, and I don't think it will be good for one hospital in one country not to observe any of this or not even one of this. So the validation of processes in the conditioning of medical products is of course legally binding. Let me tell you, because we are referring to medical and hospitals, let me explain to you a little bit about two things: the validation and the routine monitoring, because in the hospitals, both are very critical and important. Well, the validation is normally referring to almost the new equipment or new machineries that are used in the hospitals or in the CSSD, but not only the new ones, but also those that are repaired, adjusted, or recalibrated. So validation involves IQ, OQ, and PQ, which are the essentials of validation. It's a complete presentation and verification of facts that produces and processes equipment, materials, process steps, everything that is concerning an important process or machinery. An IQ, OQ, PQ is very essential. And this is completed with documentation as a summary and then presented in details in a validation report. So basically that's validation. And we have been talking about validation since um, um, couple of years ago, and I'm very sure that most of you understand um, this validation concept now. But not all of you knows about routine control, which is different with validation. This is more frequent. This process is actually a series of periodic verifications to check if everything is working, not only with the washer disinfectors and sterilizers, and I mean the autoclaves, but also the different machineries in the CSSD and in the hospital. The frequency of performing routine controls depends on the machineries and the processes, which are solely on the responsibility of the assigned operator and the managers. Okay, now we go into details about washer disinfector processes, but not using chemical indicators, but this time with using data loggers. The use of data loggers is actually acceptable, and we call it a thermometric or parametric method of measurements. And these are guided very much accordingly by the ISO 15883, which is explaining in detail the procedures on routine control and validation of washer disinfector processes. EN norm or 15883 in a brief presentation in parts is presented here, and I will not read each of one, but these are all like very specific on different kind of tests, like for thermal disinfection for surgical instruments and other equipment, utensils, glassware, and there's also specifics about disinfection for human waste containers, and a part that explains very specifically on chemical disinfection for thermolabile endoscopes. Let me stop here. Thermolabile, it's not a wrong English. Thermolabile means a substance readily destroyed or deactivated by heat. So this is a very specific adjective that is presented in the 15883-4 because it is important for one to know that thermolabile is not actually the most referring to the most heat resistant microorganisms. So these are easily destroyed or deactivated by heat. And that's the reason why we don't um, supply or expose those products in very high temperatures in the washer disinfectors. And there's part 5, 6, and 7. And anyway, you will have a copy of this, but this is a very good guideline or standard that you can refer to when you talk to your customers. So this guideline applies for the validation and the repeated performance evaluation or routine monitoring of conditioning processes with thermal disinfection in washer disinfectors. So it relates to washer disinfectors only. So these are very important technical requirements. Thank you, Ebro, Germany, for this information that I like very much. The washer disinfector device, which is number 1. Actually, this is the most important requirement for me, which is referring to the cleaning programs and disinfection programs and rinsing water circulation. Second is more academic because this is purely guided by your SOPs in the CSSD, the loading configurations, and third, the equipment and the utilities. Equipment and utilities is very important because it has got all the important ingredient to complete a successful washer disinfection process. And number four, the process chemicals. Detergents, disinfectants, and other compounds. And this is why it is very important for our routine control and validation to use conductivity meters. Then instrument design. And lastly, the load carrier, or which is referring to the mechanical parts of the washer disinfectors. Moving forward, now we talk about validation of the thermal process in washer disinfector and how they are supposed to be performed properly. And these will help you, these questions will help you with implementing a good procedure. And number one, you have to ask, how does the temperature curve evolve during the cleaning step? And then you need the data loggers with temperature sensors. Second, what is the final temperature that is reached and how long is this temperature held? So now you need a temperature sensor with a recorder and an accurate time. Third, what system relates to pressure that's occurred during the separate phases? Um, there's only Ebro where I've seen a logger with a good connector for hoses, and this is making the measurements for pressure very accurate. Fourth, which temperature do the instrument reach? And fifth, how long is the maximum value held? And then you will be aided by the use of our software up to number 6, and what is the resulting AO value. We will be talking about AO value a little bit in the succeeding slides, but AO value is actually referring to the disinfection value unique to washer disinfector processes. So we go to essentials for validation. Now we need pressure, measurements for pressure changes, its behavior during the process. We need pH value during rinsing. It is important but optional. We need specific conductance in fluent water, specific conductance last rinsing water, and temperatures during the disinfection. I inserted this slide because IQ, OQ, and PQ will actually guide you with your criteria on dealing with the results that you will get from this. All right. I will not be discussing more about IQ, OQ, PQ, but just to inform you that IQ, OQ, PQ explains, verifies, and validates that all functionalities, all process steps in your flow and in your instruments are according to their own predetermined specifications. So this will remain as our guide for as long as the CSSD process flow is not changed or altered. Then we go to control and monitoring of the water volume, the dosage, the pH values, the temperature during cleaning and thermal disinfections, and the controls for pressure, perfusion, quality of water, and the specific conductance by the end of the last rinsing. And you can see the picture here that Ivan actually used a conductivity meter with a probe, and that actually made us decide to open up the washer disinfector just to introduce the cable probe from outside the washer disinfector to inside, and positioning the sensor near the drain of the washer disinfector. And I must remind you that this was resolved and we have a solution with a wireless conductivity logger. The formula for the A value calculation is shown here. Um, I will not be talking about the formula, but any one of you who are interested about calculating disinfection values manually, I will be very, very happy to discuss this with you. So if you want to know how to do some calculations manually, let me know. You can send me an email or call me. But just very briefly, I'll explain to you that this disinfection value is actually your target. In order for you to get an indication whether your washer disinfection process is successful or not successful, or fail or pass. So these are references of um, what is the acceptable disinfection values for bedpan washer disinfectors, for non-critical medical products, and for critical medical products, and according to ISO 15883. Um, the reason why I'm presenting this is your customers in the CSSD will really appreciate the software because our software, the Med or the WinLog validation, can automatically calculate for the disinfection values, just basing everything on the data acquisition process using the loggers. Now we go to validation of processes with thermal disinfection. There are some um, procedures that we have to note before implementation. The positioning of the temperature sensors. When you look at the positioning of the temperature sensors and look at 1, 2, 3, and 4, and you look at the catalog with our force logger with 4 sensors with flexible cables, this is going to solve this procedure with a lot of convenience and accuracy. Um, uh, Rather than using thermocouple wires, which is now impossible in most high-tech washer disinfectors, I think the use of data loggers, wireless data loggers, has become um, highly in demand. So these processes is recommended to check with a minimum of 2 cycles involving 6 measuring points and 3 cycles with 4 measuring points for each loading category. Rinsing of all processed chemicals, verification by Siemens measurement or conductivity measurement. We all know about conductivity, but just to explain a little bit about conductivity. Um, it is a measure, just a review. I hope I'm correct, but I think it is a measure of the water's capability to pass electrical flow, and that this is directly proportional to the concentration of ions in the water. So these are compounds that dissolve into ions known as electrons, or sorry, as electrolytes. So therefore, the more ions that are present, the higher the conductivity of water. So, and that is the reason why it is important to measure the conductivity or specific conductance in the last rinsing, because when we are washing, we are using detergents and chemicals. And in order for us to get an indication that the rinsing is proper and completed is by measuring the conductivity of the water. pH measurement. We all know pH measurement, but it would be nice to use temperature compensated loggers, pH loggers that were adjusted with buffer solutions. We have a solution for that as well. We also have alternative pH loggers that are available from the Salem Analytics brands. Alternatively, you can use temperature compensated pH measuring devices. Um, the neutralization in the first rinsing and the pH value in the last rinsing can also be measured, but the better result you will measure with the conductivity data logger. Now we go to validation report of washer disinfector processes. Um, Unfortunately, I will not be showing you the software this time because of some time constraints, but try to play with your WinLog Med or WinLog validation software packages, and you can see the process by simply looking into some data that are available to you from Ebro, Germany, and you can see just by a push of a button, a push of a key, these reports will automatically be generated. Okay, so that's the first part of the important process in the CSSD, the washer disinfection process. And now we go to the most important one, the sterilizers, also under thermometric method. We all know about sterilization, and we all know that sterilization is performed in an autoclave. In the hospital, most of them are using steam sterilizers, so they are using steam autoclaves, huge ones, and most of them are high-tech ones, from good brands. Um, but there are also some laboratory scale autoclaves, which is not really different with the kind of autoclaves that we use in the pharmaceutical processes and even in the food processes. But one thing that you should know here is the the other sterilizers for other important materials in the hospitals, such as the face mask, um, the N95 mask, surgical mask, and other PPEs. Most of these are sterilized by ethylene oxide chambers. We are also guided by a standard when dealing with autoclaves in hospitals, which is the ISO 17665. Hope everyone is still awake. Okay, the important preconditions for a sterilization. Um, well, as we mentioned a while ago, cleaning and disinfection processes must be validated. Why? Because it's hardly possible for an object or material that are not clean to be sterilized. Okay, then the proper drying, maintenance of instruments, the packaging, and maintained sterilizer. You have to know this very well. A maintained sterilizer, it means that it should be a properly working autoclave. The correct loading, the correct program selection, and the validated sterilization processes and the routine control processes. So these are your checklist um, for um, sterilization procedures. Now here we go again with IQ, OQ, and PQ. Because it is mentioned also by the ISO 17665. To your left, the commissioning refers to new equipment, and this also includes the refurbished equipment. Um, and then to the right is the PQ, which is a cycle that completes the IQ OQ, but it is also valid for already used autoclaves in the hospital CSSD units. Okay, these are the necessary preparations, the charge or batch composition. And the software is actually very specific on charge numbers, but this is actually referring to other applications as the batch numbers or lot numbers. Sterile goods, the packaging, the weight, which is very important for the temperature equilibration conditions, and all sample loadings must be documented and photographed. This is how it is in the CSSD units in the hospitals because everything must be properly documented. So we have here the sequence with the OQ. I'd like to go immediately to number 4, the checks, the conductivity of feed water vacuum test, BD, the Bowie and Dick test or helix test, empty chamber profile, thermometric check with partial loading, thermometric check with full loading, and sometimes even the thermometric check for empty chambers. I went to number 4 immediately because this is where Ebro can really help the CSSD units. We will go to the BD test or the Bowie and Dick test in detail later. Okay, then we go to the general information, the summary of the results, preconditioning for the performance qualification, the checks, and this is what I am going to elaborate on, and the determination of routine controls. Number 5 relies heavily on the responsibility of the CSSD operators, but they have to base all of these routine controls SOP to the results that they got from all the checks that they performed. Validation of processes in steam sterilizers. Well, it needs to check the condition with partial loading and the condition in full loading configurations. And there's no shortcut for validating steam sterilizers in the hospitals. So here you go. I'm sharing this photo of myself and Melia because it could help you when you try to go out and buy your groceries. No, I'm just joking. The validation must be performed by only by authorized personnel and who are knowledgeable about the regulations, the standards, and the norms. I know this will make you fall asleep, but after this webinar session, I'm going to reach out to each one of you to discuss this with me or talk me out of this illustration here because I have been using this in almost all my meetings with all my dealers and customers. The reason why I like this illustration is because this is how the WinLog Med and the WinLog validation software will be able to present the kind of running condition and operating condition of your autoclaves. It is the most comprehensive I have ever seen. Um, so if you look at these temperature curves, um, the most important one, if I will ask you, you might say It is the holding time or the equilibration time. My answer to you is all of these stages are important. And this is why optimizing and maximizing the use of the WinLog validation and the WinLog Med software um, must be optimized by the users. So they should know how to operate the software to the smallest detail. Because why? Number one, the evacuation, the air evacuation. You don't know how important it is for the CSSD operators to know that everything inside the autoclave is 100% saturated steam. This to them is very important because it will be affecting the heat penetration capabilities of the autoclave and the process. Oh my God, I have 5 minutes left. Um, Reaching the sterilization conditions. This is from the SOPs and the standards, very well explained in the standards. Interpretation of the thermometric measurement, which I can explain to you one by one, and most of you should know this already. The measuring values outside the tolerances. Why is this important? Because you're dealing with medical products, and that's the bottom line. And now the SOPs, all the instructions from operating procedures and other procedures that are requiring details. So still according to ISO 17665, you will see here the importance of measuring pressure in your processes, because not only is pressure directly proportional to temperature, but it's also very much a factor for heat penetration and keeping the equilibration time um, criteria. So to end the session, this webinar session, we have all the solutions for all that we have talked about in the succeeding slides. We have the most suitable data loggers for this application, for the washer and disinfection, and also for sterilization. Um, and actually the most practical configuration. Instead of buying 4 loggers for one measuring point to be placed and fixed in their correct locations, Ebro can provide you with only 1 logger, but with long, um, flexible PT1000 sensors, such as this picture on your right. And we also have, as an option, the mini loggers, the EBI11. The conductivity logger, which is very important for washer disinfection processes. Um, it is a good trend that we started with Ebro, and I think it is being copied now by some of the competition, but we are faring very well. We have the pressure sensors with temperature sensors and the Bowie and Dick test um, logger. So this is a good alternative for your chemical indicators for your Bowie and Dick procedures for autoclaves. And it is certified according to ISO 11140-4 by an independent laboratory. So the Bowie and Dick test logger, the EBI16, is simulating not only the towel pack test in the autoclaves, but also the heat penetration test and the temperature measurement inside the chamber, and also the pressure measurements as converted into theoretical steam temperatures. So it's like a 3-in-1 or 4-in-1 data logger. Then I have mentioned there's some softwares that are very important for all those that we have talked about, um, the WinLog validation and the WinLog Med. So that will be all for now. Um, if you have any questions, Michael Watt will be coming in. Um, Michael, can you join me up here, please? So we can open up the question and answer forum.
Hello, Allan.
Hi,
Thanks for a
Michael.
great presentation.
Welcome. Thank you.
There are a few questions that have come in, and I now open up the question or chat box window on your PCs, on your screen. Feel free to type in your questions there, and we'll go through them one at a time with Allan. Again, just simply type your question into the chat box on your screen. So Allan, while those are lining up, we do have some questions that were asked initially at the beginning of this webinar. And the first one is, the viruses that are viruses destroyed at different temperatures than bacteria and fungi? Again,
Yeah,
if
this
some of these questions are overly technical, we can take them
that's
offline
okay.
and ask the, send an email directly to the person who's asked the question.
That's okay. That's okay. I like that question. That's a great question, Michael. We have different kind of microorganisms under different classifications. Can I answer that now, by the way?
Please do, yes.
Yeah, it's like, during this current situation, the COVID-19 pandemic, why are the authorities asking us to wash our hands and disinfect at the same time? No, not at the same time, but in sequence, because washing already addresses and targets some bacteria, because some bacteria will not survive, will not be able to do the activities um, anymore after washing with a soap or detergent. But we need to disinfect because we remember we talked about thermolabiles, and these can be addressed or targeted by using the disinfectants that we have available in the market today. Fungi, for example, when we are dealing with fungi in the human skin or the human body, um, then exposing them to extreme high temperatures will not be the right procedure. So, but this can be targeted in different kinds of temperature settings. And we have a scientific background for dealing with all these microorganisms. Um, it is very well explained in the food industry. When you are dealing with Pasteurianum, yeast, or molds, then you process these products at temperatures under 100 degrees Celsius, but in a prolonged time. But when we are dealing with most high resistant microorganisms, then we have to sterilize this in order to destroy their spores or reduce their spores. And that's from 115 degrees Celsius and above. In pharmaceutical and medical applications, normally it's 121 degrees Celsius and 130 degrees Celsius plus. So, yeah, all these microorganisms under different classifications can be treated by heat, but they can also be treated by simple disinfection. Thank you, Michael.
Thanks, Allan. Okay, let's move on to the next question. What is your recommendation on how long Ebro products need to be calibrated?
If they are used, it depends on the luggers. If it's the EBI 12 luggers, which are very stable because they're using PT 1000 sensor elements, and the PT 1000 sensor elements is not unique to Ebro. But you should all know that PT1000 sensor elements are the most stable in the industry. So calibrating this once a year is very safe. But for very critical operations, then we would recommend that um, the management or the quality people decide or calibrate this in the frequency according to their discretion. Thanks, Michael.
Okay, great, Alan. We've got quite a few questions coming in. We won't be able to answer them all, but please do continue entering your questions. We do record them, and we will have Alan come back to you offline. So, Alan, the next question. Let's see. Surgical instruments are of different sizes and shapes. How do you select a proper process time and temperature?
That's a good question, but at this time we have some constraint, but this um, kind of instruments are categorized according to their sizes and purpose, and these are all very explained in detail the procedure in the standards that I've shown you a while ago. Um, but I have a presentation from Ivan Kruse, which explains about all these loading configurations for specific um, tools and instruments, surgical instruments, you may say, according to their sizes and purposes or functions. I'll share that to you. But yes, we are guided accordingly by the standards. Thanks, Michael.
All right, Alan, next one. For food manufacturing, do you also have a WinLog validation for heat penetration test?
For heat penetration test is relative because when you say heat penetration test, um, you might only be requiring the use of general method, and that's the accumulated FO value from start to end of process. But when you say heat penetration, you may also be referring to process simulation, such as simulating the processes or process schedules according to can size. Uh, the ball method and how to calculate it is available commercially, but we don't have that yet in the WinLog validation software. But I can share a good um, program, or I can share with you how a formula of how to calculate it. Thanks, Michael.
Okay, Alan, is it mandatory to perform a routine test
Oh
for a
yeah.
wash and disinfector? And how often should this be done?
Um, the frequency must be according to um, the results that the customer were able to have during their IQ, OQ, PQ, or their validations. The routine monitoring, the frequency of it could be performed twice a month or every month. Now, that's how it is in most of the CSSD operations. But if your washer disinfectors are kind of old one, then it must be like um, with a closer frequency for the routine monitoring. Thanks, Michael.
Yeah, okay, last question here, folks. I'm sorry. Again, feel free to continue adding your questions to the chat box, and we will certainly get back to you offline. Last question here, Alan. Is the validation software for single user, or can multiple users use the software concurrently?
You know, we want to control the WinLog validation software by license. I'm not really sure about this, but I think the license is only valid for up to 4 computers. I have not taken the risk of installing one software license for more than 4 computers, but I think it is very much controlled with a license, and I think it can only be installed up to maximum of 4 computers. Michael, I have been receiving a lot of questions from my WhatsApp, from my line, and from my Messenger. You can also like do this. The customers can also send their questions directly to me if we're not able to accommodate all of you.
You're a popular man, Allan. Congratulations.
No, I'm not. I'm not.
Okay, I guess we've reached the end of our allotted time. I'd just like to thank everyone for attending, and Allan, I'll give you the final words.
Yeah. You know, this webinar session was initiated by the management, and I'm very thankful for their initiatives. Um, but what I'm excited about is for the next week's webinar session, because to me this is very much related to the COVID-19 situation, because all of us are wearing the PPEs such as the safety mask, face mask, N95, surgical mask, all this. And I'm going to talk about ethylene oxide sterilization, which is the only method of sterilizing all these PPEs. So thanks everyone, and I hope to see you next week. I'll be even more prepared for that webinar session, and hopefully we'll have more time to have this Q&A session extended a little bit, Michael, if that's possible. So thank you guys. Thank you so much for your time. And please stay safe, keep yourselves healthy, and keep the family safe. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Allan. Goodbye, all.
Goodbye, all.